All right, guys, welcome aboard. This is a regular Mac Forum Sunday night chat for September 13th, 2015. I hope that you're having a good day. It's turned out to be a not so good football day so far, but hey, that's okay. We'll get over that. Got the Cowboys game coming up here later. Got that waiting to be recorded because it'll start here before you know it. No, I did not forego the show in order to do to watch the Cowboys game. We'll just watch the end of it later. Do want to pass along a couple of things for you today. First of all, as you might have noticed, we were not here last week due to the Labor Day weekend here in the States. So I hope you enjoyed yourself. We're back this week, and hopefully we'll have some interesting things for you. Let's go ahead and get right into things. First of all, as usual, with our membership roundup, we have 280,000, almost 281,000 members, 3,260 of which are what the forum software classifies as active members. And the newest member, I want to welcome to them, is JSkin79. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Sometimes some of the member names are a little hard to figure out a pronunciation for. I hope I got that one right. We'll go ahead and we'll get things started with our roundup of forum content here. Just a couple of things. One or two of the forum things I wanted to mention tonight predate the Apple Media event, which was just this past week on September 9th. So we have a couple of links that predate the thread and that event, and then we'll have a couple of links to some information about what was discussed in the Apple Media event. So let's get right into the forum roundup, so to speak. Out of those threads that we have active, one of them, member DTravis7, I want to thank him. He brought us a post, started a thread about a new piece of malware that he brought to our attention. Our fine friends at Genio, I'm sure you've seen some of their malware, have apparently crafted a piece of malware that accesses a user's keychain without their permission. You know, keychain is where a lot of users have their passwords and etc. stored. The entire operation takes just a few seconds. In the original Ars Technica article, it describes the problem in this way, quote, Genio acquires access by very briefly displaying a message asking for permission to open the Safari extensions, and then automatically clicking the accompanying OK button before the user has time to respond. And this apparently gets them access to the keychain because certain types of information, as far as extension goes, are also stored in keychain apparently. Now, this was a little hard for me to grab when I read the thread, but fortunately Dennis posted a link to the Ars Technica article, and they have a short video of what happens. And when I say short, I do mean short. I put a link, I'll have a link in the show notes so you can kind of see it in action. This, I think, it will not surprise me if there are some changes that will block access to this over time. But I do want you to be aware of that until we get more. I don't know that it's a huge threat, but it's annoying to have to jump through these kinds of hoops to prevent somebody from doing something. To me, whether they're doing something nefarious or not is irrelevant. It's a bit sneaky and underhanded, for lack of a better word. If you want access to somebody's keychain, don't pull stunts like this. If you've got a legit reason, let me know, and I get to decide whether you deserve to have access or not. This just strikes me as very sneaky, even if they're not up to anything nefarious. As some of you know, we've had numerous forum threads going in the last year or two about how hard it is to get rid of some of this stuff from Genio once it's on your system. We've had numerous people have that kind of problem, and so I don't trust this kind of stuff to be on the up and up. Whether it is or not, it always makes me a little suspicious when I see behavior like this. If you're doing something legit, why are you resorting to this kind of behavior? That's just my way of looking at it. I think legit software, legit installers are going to kind of follow the rules and the expectations that their customers have for being asked for permission, and then having the dialogue staying up there long enough to be useful and understood. On a different note, some of you who work a lot with photos may have noticed that when you transfer photos to a Mac sometimes, if they're coming off of, say, a Windows machine, or sometimes off of I think it also happens occasionally when it comes off of the SD cards and cameras, sometimes the creation date on the photo will be changed from the day it was shot to the date that it was moved onto another machine. And this can happen sometimes depending upon the way that it was transferred. And I haven't spent a lot of time on this one, but it's very easy for some software to make that mistake. There's a thread going in the forum where it seems like what happens is the date that gets used now, instead of being the date the photo was originally created, becomes the date that it was copied onto the computer. In that case, if you want the original photo creation date, and some people want that for various reasons, you can build an album based on when pictures were taken based on that. One thing that seems to happen, Patrick, aka PMR on the forum, reports that one possible fix to the, oh, excuse me, sorry about that, I read the wrong note. The fix for this, we'll get to Patrick's fix in a minute. The fix for this is to take a utility that can open the EXIF data on the photograph, and then reset that photo to the original creation date. There are a number of pieces of software that can read this data. Photoshop is mentioned in the thread, but there are some others, including, I believe, iPhoto. If you've got Photoshop laying around, give that a shot. But you know, if you don't have that laying around, there are cheaper alternatives, including things that may already be on your Mac. There's a couple pieces of software listed in that thread. I know in a lot of cases iPhoto can read it. So I'll post a link to that in the show notes as well. And now we get to the hint from member PMR. Patrick posted in a thread. This thread started a while back, and apparently it's a recurring problem for some people, where they're having difficulty with Apple support pages not displaying properly. In other words, if you go to the Apple support forum, and instead of getting the regular page, you get blank pages. Well, our fellow moderator, Bob Toomey, pointed out that he had a particular extension that he had to get rid of that was causing a problem for him. Well, Patrick, aka PMR, reports that one thing that seemed to clear it up for him was adjustments in the minimum font size. If you go into Safari's preferences and adjust the minimum font size below certain parameters, and he has a link there, to, I believe, to the discussion forum about it. I haven't experienced this problem yet, probably partly because I have very few extensions installed in Safari, and partly because due to problems I had reading certain websites where the text was too small, I tried setting the minimum font size higher. Didn't like the way the page rendered, because to get a text size that I liked on those sites, I ended up using a value that just didn't show very well. And someone suggested to me, I think it was Charlie, suggested to me that I use CSS, to style sheet, to zoom the value of the page kind of automatically. And that's what I've been doing. I've got a zoom value set a little bit above 100%, and I don't have to go through and do the Command plus routine to enlarge the print. I don't have to worry about the font sizes and does 14-point font render appropriately on this site? Does it take 16 on this site? Does it take 12 on this site? I have a lot less of that problem since I went to using style sheet to zoom the value of the text. But there's a link in that thread. That's a good one to look at if you're having that issue. Another one that I want to be sure I mention. This is a couple of, as you know, I've been checking out Kirk McLaren's iTunes site over the last couple of months, and I've also started reading some of Kirk's columns again. There are numerous iTunes columns. There's a reason Kirk's known as the iTunes guy. He's forgotten more iTunes stuff than a lot of people know. He's certainly forgotten more than I know. But I started reading some of his columns a while back when I had some issues with sorting albums and tracks, etc., etc., etc. in iTunes. We got away from reading the columns for a while, and now with the advent of the website, I'm going back and reading some of those. One of them that I read recently, it's not a huge issue for me, but it would be for some people, involved audiobooks and the way they're handled in iTunes 12. In previous versions of iTunes, you had a field for the release date for audiobooks. That field seems to be, for lack of a better word, missing or hidden in iTunes 12, and Kurt mentions to you a way to kind of bring that back if you're interested in that. It's not the release date for audiobooks is not a big deal to me, but it is for some people. So I encourage you to take a look at that. I'll have a link to that in the show notes, as well as an iTunes article that he did about the different media views that are available in iTunes. It gets a little confusing sometimes because you have so many types of media subsumed under iTunes and different views. Some things show in certain views, some things don't. This might help you if you're finding a little trouble wrapping your head around some of those views. So I put a link to that. I'll have a link to that article in the show notes as well. And of course, this week, over the past week, the big news seemed to be the Apple Media event held on Wednesday. And for once, I did not watch this particular keynote. I'm usually working on Wednesday, and I usually miss this keynote. I usually catch the one in early summer for WWDC, and I missed this one. I didn't check it out this time. I was busy. Haven't checked out the full keynote yet. Have looked at some of the summaries and some of the information that's on the Apple site. As we expected, there are some hardware announcements related to the iOS/Apple TV section of the Apple universe. And for any of this, we're seeing, when we talk about the new iPhone models, the iPad Pro, which was long awaited, had been speculated about for a long time, that finally came to fruition. I'll talk about that in a minute. A new release of the Apple TV that is coming with some, what I think are probably going to be some interesting capabilities. I'm still wrapping my head around that a little bit. Didn't get to look at as much of that before the show as I hoped to. But let's just take a look at some of the things that did come out. First of all, be aware that if you have or you're going to acquire one of these new devices, some of them are not available yet, you're going to need either a Mac running at least 10.7.5 or a Windows box running Windows 7 or later and iTunes 12.3 or later. So the Windows people haven't been left out, but if you're not running Windows 7, some of these newer devices are not going to sync, because, and the same is true for a Mac if you're running something less than 10.7.5. So those of you that are still running Snow Leopard, you're out of luck on a lot of this as far as the software goes and being able to sync up. Also, if you're still running a version of iTunes that predates iTunes 12. I know, though, we do have some forum users that have not shifted to iTunes 12 yet because they don't like certain aspects of iTunes 12. Interface changes, some other things. You know, we all have our different reasons for either loving or hating iTunes. And it seems like with each iteration that comes out, there's a very vocal group of people taking sides one way or the other, whether they like it or hate it, and iTunes 12 is no exception. There's some things, I personally am okay with iTunes 12. I was a little unnerved about it for about a week before I kind of got my feet under me in terms of what was where. I personally think it's time for a major rewrite of iTunes. I don't know what the solution is yet, but you've got so many different kinds of media and so many different views in iTunes now, and so many functions all rolled into one program that I think, particularly for those who are not, who are new to iTunes, it's a little daunting, and maybe more daunting than it needs to be. But that's a topic for another day. Some of the things that did get announced, as we expected, the iPhone 6S. Some tweaks to the iPhone 6 lines, the 6S and 6S Plus. These are going to be available beginning the end of this month. Projected date is around September 25th. In 16, 64, and 128 gigabyte variations. As we've seen before, on a lot of the iOS devices, the 16 gigabyte variety seems to be the floor model now, where it used to be 8. And on a lot of the devices, there is no 32 gigabyte version. It goes from 16 to 64. Let's see, and so one of the things that we see with this, there are 2 different screen sizes. the 4.7-inch variety and the 5.5-inch Retina display. The 5.5-inch one has 1920 by 1080 resolution. Both models have a 64-bit A9 chip with a motion coprocessor, and that should really help with speed and also with processing of some games. More and more people now are using their phones as game machines as they commute back and forth. So that should help. If you remember the demos from the summer keynote, some of the things that they were able to demonstrate were pretty amazing, and I think this is going to make good use of those chips. I think we're going to see some interesting things come out of that. A 12 megapixel camera. The 6S Plus is going to include optical image stabilization. The FaceTime camera is HD. As far as wireless networking, you've got the usual array of variations of wireless network: A, B, G, N, and AC. So if you've got the older A, B, or G equipment, you still should be okay with that, unless you're tied to using web encryption. That's just not going to work with some things. But it also includes wireless AC support. As you know, more and more of the newer devices are coming with that wireless AC because of the increased speed. Bluetooth 4.2, near field communication. The talk time on the 6S Plus is going to be up to 24 hours. That's a phenomenal amount of talk time. For me, I just got the iPhone 6S a couple of months ago, so I probably won't be upgrading the phone. So the wife doesn't need to have a heart attack. I'm not going to be upgrading the iPhone to the 6S Plus right now. The new features are interesting, but they're not a big enough jump over my current 6S based on what I use the phone for. Some people are going to want the new one for a variety of reasons. For me, it's not as big a jump. If you're coming from an older model, say a 4, or even some of the 5s, and you like doing a lot of different things and your phone is your primary device, then yeah, you probably found some things that you like if you know, in the announcements. The next thing, of course, is the iPad Pro, which I'm tempted to nickname Godzilla. I'm sorry, Apple. I know you don't want this thing called Godzilla, but hey, I'm thinking about it really hard here. This thing is, first of all, it's available in a 32 gigabyte model with Wi-Fi. It's going to be about $800 US. And a 128 gigabyte for just under $1,000. It's going to run around $950. And the Wi-Fi plus cellular model is going to run just under $1,100. I think the pricing suggested was $1,079, and that's probably without the keyboard, the pencil, and some of the other things. I'm still checking into some of those accessories to see in terms of capabilities that they add. I'm still wrapping my brain around the iPad. I haven't spent a lot of time looking at this week. You'll be hearing some more thoughts from me on this probably next week. But for right now, just keep in mind, this thing is going to have dual microphones. It's got stereo speakers, and there's the smart lightning connector. It looks like some of the things that look interesting to me. I'm normally in favor of a large screen. This thing, because I have big hands and for a variety of other reasons, This thing has a 12.9-inch Retina display with anti-reflective coating. You've got the 64-bit A9, 64-bit chip with the M9 coprocessor. The camera is 8 megapixel. We'll do 1080p video camera at 30 frames per second. Slow-mo is 120 frames per second. The FaceTime camera is 720p and should have about a 10-hour battery life. Obviously, that's going to depend on what you're using it for. The heavier the use, the less the battery. But I found Apple's iPad battery estimates have been pretty accurate for me, even on days when I'm heavily using. And that's been true of every iPad that I've had. On days when I'm using it fairly heavily, if I start from a full charge, I'm probably getting at least the 10 hours that they suggest. Some days I'll get a little more depending on how much I'm using it. The days when I come close to not getting that are days when I'm having trouble getting a signal. Because part of the day I'm in places, much of the day, where I don't have Wi-Fi access. So if I'm having trouble getting a cell signal on that day, not only may I not have access, but it's trying so much to query the network and get a cell signal that it's burning battery, and then I come close to not getting 10 hours of time. In addition to the problem of not having access to some functions. It's not a huge issue for me, though, given that I'm in class most of the day, and most of the time, unless I'm accessing something that I want to show to somebody, that it's not an issue. But iPad battery life has never been a real big issue for me. Of course, it's going to support AirPlay mirroring, photos, audio, and video out to an Apple's TV. And on that one, for that to work, you don't need the newest version that was just announced. An Apple TV 2 will get the job done. The second generation Apple TV will get the job done. Video mirroring and video output support up to 1080p through the Lightning Digital AV adapter and Lightning to VGA adapter. And the adapters are going to be sold separately. But what's interesting to me about that is that opens up an avenue. One of the things that I missed when I shifted from my old first generation iPad to the newer iPads was the ability to mirror video over to a whiteboard, these electronic whiteboards. On the first gen iPads, I could do it with a cable that was composite on one end, and the other end was the 30-pin connector, same like a charging connector on the first generation iPad. When you move to the Lightning connector on a lot of the models of the iPad, in order to push video out to something like a smartboard, you had to have network access and push it to the computer that the smartboard was connected to, the whiteboard's connected to, and then work from there. That's not workable for me sometimes, just because of the network settings and other situations. It's not a feature that I use a lot. I probably might use it a bit more with this kind of setup if this works, where you're not having to be on the same network and you can push something directly to the board without having to be on the same network and have network access. So that's going to be an interesting thing. The $1,100 price tag, give or take a few bucks by the time you add the accessories, $1,100. My initial reaction was it was a little pricey, but when you think about it, and it may be member Chaz M that got me thinking about this, Um, when you think about it, the Surface, for example, Microsoft Surface, which is a tablet slash computer hybrid kind of thing, is running about $700 to $800, right in the same price range as the 32 gig Wi-Fi model. I think whether or not this is going to be a value is going to depend heavily on what you're planning on doing with it. For some people, this iPad is probably going to work as a computer replacement. In other words, for what they do, they could, especially if they already have an Apple TV, mirror their screen over to their TV set via the Apple TV. That way, when they're working at home, they've got access to a large screen. When they need to get on with other things, you've got a highly portable gizmo that weighs, I think the weight that I saw was about 1.5 pounds. It's no worse than the original iPad 1, really. Now, I did not think the iPad 1 was heavy when I first started messing with it. I do now. It's heavy in comparison to the newer models. But I will tell you, there have been times, particularly when I first shifted from the old iPad to the newer ones, there have been times where I've almost swung an iPad across the room because I picked it up expecting heavy weight, and it was light, and I almost dropped it because of that clumsiness on my part. And of course, the one that I'm still wrapping my brain around is the Apple TV announcements, which is going to include Siri. As I think that could be a big deal, and that might be the thing. We've had an Apple TV, the current model of the Apple TV, for a while. I like it. I use it to push audio from my Mac to the stereo. That's the main thing I use it for, but I do use it for other things. I've got some software that lets me push video over to the Apple TV and over to my TV monitor if I want to do that. But what I'm looking at, when this thing comes out, one of the things that I am going to really be paying attention to is what kind of changes did they do to the menu and specifically to voice and searching using Siri. And the reason I say that is this. My wife and I concluded long ago that we have very, very different ideas about what constitutes easy to use. And as you start building up a media library of stuff that you want to watch, sometimes searching for stuff like that can get a little confusing. It gets a little cumbersome in terms of which buttons do I have to push, what do I have to type in to find the particular content that I'm looking for. And with some of the things about changes in the remote, changes in the menu, and Siri, voice activation, voice searching, this looks like it might be an interesting approach, kind of simplify things a little bit more for us. I personally am of the school that the more buttons there are to push, the more fun I'm going to have. But I fully admit that not everybody thinks that way. You know, the great flaw in that is there aren't enough buttons to push, but that's just me. It may be a good thing for us, and it's something that I'm certainly going to look at as more information comes about over the next few months. But anyway, we'll have a little bit more about some of the technical capabilities next time, as I've had a little more opportunity to look at those things and see. But those were some of the more interesting things that caught my attention during the week. And of course, Apple has also announced they've got a plan for replacing devices that is somewhat similar to the plan that some U.S. Cell carriers have had for a while now, where you pay a little bit extra every month, and periodically, about every 12 to 18 months, depending on the carrier, you can update to new gear. Apple's plan is somewhat similar to that. That's going to be a big deal for some people. Whether or not it's going to be a big deal for me is going to depend heavily on specifics. In other words, I mean, there might be some years where there's a technological change that I just have to have. There are going to be some years where there's a technological change that when I first look at it, I'm thinking, no, I don't really need that. And then as I see it being used and look at the different ways it can be used, I change my mind. That happens, and that happened to me with the first generation iPad. I was watching the keynote when the first generation iPad was announced. I didn't see the keynote during the day, so I was watching it that night at home. And my wife happened to walk into the room, and I was kind of halfway listening to the keynote, halfway doing something else on the Mac. And she happens to be paying more attention to the keynote than I was. They got to the description of the iPad, and her first reaction was, this would be a good idea for you. You wouldn't have to carry your laptop. And and I have to admit that up until that point, that had not occurred to me. The things that I might need the laptop for during the day, 90% of them could be done with an iPad. The others probably could be either done on a computer that you sit down at for a few minutes, or you put off until you get home in the evening. So it left open the possibility of not carrying the laptop, because I got to tell you, if I had to carry the laptop much more than I had been doing, it probably wouldn't have lasted as long, because I already dropped the battery out of it 2 or 3 times as she was saying that, and I'd already wrecked at least one hard drive because the compartment cover where the battery and hard drive were not on right, and I did not realize I had forgotten that when I changed the drive, I did not put all of the drive screws back in. And so when I got to a point where I was having the battery swell, I took the battery out one day, plugged the Mac in to check something. The Mac is sitting on the table, and I go to pick it up, and I forget that the battery compartment cover was not there. I hadn't put it back on yet. And bada bing, bada boom, the hard drive hits the floor. It survived the first time that happened. It did not survive the second time that happened. Hence, I now have an SSD in the Mac instead of a standard hard drive. So as these devices come up, a lot of times what drives me, much though I would love to have the newest technology every time, a lot of time what drives me is either budget constraints, is this really worth what I'm going to have to spend for it, or does it do something that I need to do, or that I either can't do right now or can't do as easily. So it's going to be, I think it's going to be that kind of thing before I decide that these current upgrade schemes are worth participating in. They may or may not be a better deal than what your carrier is offering. You're going to have to look at that on a case-by-case basis. Same thing with the insurance on these devices. There are third parties now that are offering insurance on these types of devices. May or may not be a better deal for you than AppleCare or your carrier, depending upon where you are and what your specific needs are. I haven't done an extensive review of that yet, so that one's kind of up in the air. But as I say, there was a lot of interesting stuff. Right now, no compelling need for me to upgrade. But by the time I'm eligible to upgrade my current devices, the iPad Pro will have been around long enough for me to decide if it's a good idea for me. There are some things I really like about it. There are other things that I'm thinking, I don't really need that. So we're going to have to see. I'm going to have to watch and see what others say as they're playing around with it. But anyway, that's kind of my take on stuff so far. As I say, I'll have more about the Apple TV next week as I've had time to experiment with things. And I might, in just here real soon, do that Blue Moon review that I've been promising. I've held off a little bit because they've made some changes to the software recently, and it's kind of improved certain things about the way it functions. It was fairly solid to begin with, but some things have improved. I might do just kind of an overview of this whole concept of using your iOS device, be it an iPhone or an iPad, as a remote control for your entertainment system. And to some extent, home automation, because some of the software has that capability as well. I personally am finding it kind of interesting, but there are some potential bumps and hurdles that are common to all of the devices that are going to be a big pain for some people, minor pain for others. So I'm thinking about doing a video review of that whole concept shortly on a future video chat, probably in about 2 weeks. And I'll probably post that also and turn it into a blog post to maybe go into a little bit more depth, but we'll see. That's going to depend kind of on my schedule and some other things. And that about does it this week. You might have noticed, I discovered right before the show, by the way, I am picking up a noise in recordings right now that I'm not sure where it's coming from. I think it's fan noise from a Mac, from something else that's going on. So I apologize for that this week. I'll be troubleshooting that a little bit during the week and kind of nailing that down. I was hoping that it wouldn't pick up, but test that I was able to do right before the show, and it seems like it might be. My apologies for that. I'll try to get that resolved before next week's video chat. And until then, I hope that you've enjoyed the information I've been able to bring to you tonight. We'll have more next week. And I look forward to seeing you in the forum. And until next week, this has been your host, Sly Dude. Look for me in the forum. Make any comments that you'd like. Let me know if there's a topic that you'd like to see discussed in the near future. It may not occur immediately, because sometimes you're going to ask about a topic that I need to research first, but feel free to post any questions or topics that you think need to be discussed on the show, as well as any other ideas that you might have. We'll filter out the ones that are really good and tackle those first and kind of move down the list. And until next week, I hope that you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you in the forum.